Well, hey there, live from my basement. It's the Illinoize Livestream podcast. I'm Patrick Pfingsten. I write the Illinoize.com political newsletter that we write every day on Illinois news and political government happenings. If you don't subscribe, go to theillinoize.com now and you can get a free subscription and get our free content that we put out every day. As we face another weird spring of Illinois politics. The assault weapons ban, as we mentioned last week, was signed into law by the governor essentially immediately after the legislature passed it. And the gun rights groups have wasted no time in filing a federal lawsuit. There was one filed late last night in the Southern District of Illinois, which is the federal court in Benton. As I pull up my story here. The case was filed by the Illinois State Rifle Association, the Firearms Policy Coalition, Second Amendment Foundation, a Randolph County gun shop, a McHenry County gun shop, and an Air Force veteran who lives in St. Clair County. Attorney General Kwame Raoul, State Police Director Brendan Kelly, and 6 local officials are defendants in the case. State Police Director Brendan Kelly, spokesman, said they do not comment on pending litigation. 28-page suit, unsurprisingly, basically claims the assault weapons ban violates the Second Amendment. It says, quote, the state's enactment and defendants' enforcement of the prohibition on common semi-automatic firearms, inaccurately labeled as assault weapons, and on certain magazines are arbitrarily deemed to be of large capacity, denies individuals who reside in the state, including the individual plaintiffs, their customers, and other members of their groups, their fundamental individual right to keep and bear common arms, the suit claims. By prohibiting plaintiffs from possessing and carrying popular semi-automatic firearms and common ammunition magazines, Illinois has prevented them from keeping and bearing arms within the meaning of the amendment's text. As a result, to justify its regulation, the government must demonstrate that the regulation is consistent with the nation's tradition of firearm regulation. Essentially, this is going to wind up in the Supreme Court, because this is clearly where this is headed. This is where these groups want it to go. They're basing their arguments on a recent case related to the New York concealed carry law called Bruen, Bruen. You can look that up. Essentially basically says that the Second Amendment means it covers everything. And you know, that's going to be a point of discussion, a point of contention. Obviously, we'll see how the Supreme Court winds up thinking here. There is a case that was filed in state court in Effingham County by Tom DeVore, who's the guy who pushed all the COVID mask mandate suits and stuff like that all got either yanked by the appellate court level or rejected at that point. The reality is, even if they get a stay from a friendly judge in Effingham County, the state appellate court is going to say that we don't have standing. They're going to kick it out, and it's going to wind up in the state or in the federal court anyway. So don't focus your attention on maybe what the media has to say today about this Effingham County case, because it's not really pertinent. The real cases are going to be fought out in federal court, and this will likely wind up with this case being heard in front of the Supreme Court. So we'll keep an eye on that. Coming up, we'll chat with former Congressman Rodney Davis. He served the 13th district from 2013 to just a couple of weeks ago. He lost a primary in June after he was gerrymandered out of his district, and has some thoughts on Kevin McCarthy, the new speaker, who he is close friends with, and also some thoughts on how Illinois Republicans can be relevant again in this state where they are increasingly irrelevant. And I also sat down yesterday with State Comptroller Susana Mendoza. We sat down for about an hour at a restaurant on the northwest side of Chicago, and instead of a full-on taped interview, since we were in kind of a crowded place and a little loud. I've got some clips for you, more than a traditional kind of sit down visit, but she's under the radar, maybe become one of the more popular politicians in the state. And, she was the highest vote getter statewide in November, by outpacing the governor by some 78,000 votes, I think it was. So she has, she has this straight talk attitude. She has this this appeal to the center and to even center right, that has made her an appealing statewide elected official, and I think has earned her some goodwill, because things have, let's face it, things have started to turn around. When she took office, we were in the midst of the Rauner debacle, and things were at, the bill backlog was something like $16 billion at that point. And, she, along with some help, I don't think she's anyone to say that, the bond deal that they passed shortly after she took office, and the tax increase that was enacted in 2017, and, some targeted things that she did in paying Medicaid first, which has higher reimbursement rates from the federal government. These things have helped chip away at that backlog. And, the state's bill payment cycle is inside 30 days at this point, which is exactly where you want it to be. It's interesting, though, because those numbers are pretty clear, and you can look at the charts that show that this was on its way in the right direction even before the pandemic hit. And there continue to be a lot of people on the right. And again, I say this is a guy who's on the center right, that want to make it sound like this has only gotten better, the budget, the bill backlog, because of that $8 billion in federal COVID dollars. I asked her about that, and essentially it's just it's not factual, and I was interested in how she combats what they have to say.
Not true. And I mean, it's hard to try to argue a lie, right? To disprove something that is impossible to prove when they say, it's dark outside, when clearly it's sunny, right? Like, I will tell you, clearly it's not sunny, and the facts are, it's light, I'm actually getting a sunburn, but they'll still say it's dark outside. And so how do I rationally say that they're not accurate? So they're either completely mistaken, there's something wrong in their brain that doesn't connect, or they're purposely misleading people, right? Because clearly these are indisputable facts. Now, when it comes to our finances and where we're at today, those are indisputable facts too. I mean, it's technically impossible, literally impossible, for me to have paid down our bill backlog to under $3 billion, to get our accounts payable under control, actually eliminate the backlog and have an accounts payable that was done before getting a penny of federal ARPA in the door. So, I mean, explain to me how that was possible, because that's not my opinion. I mean, the credit markets can attest to the fact that our accounts payable was already completely manageable, well under $3 billion, on a calendar that preceded the federal stimulus making its way to Illinois. So those are just the facts. Now, I do feel that a lot of these folks who are pushing this false narrative, they know that those are the facts, but they still keep pushing that false narrative, which at some point you start to say, I can't respect that, because now if you thought that maybe I paid down the bill backlog with those federal funds, I could see where you might think that, the timing of it, right? It's taken me 6 years to get our bill backlog under control and now having a working accounts payable. And it's not a sexy story, right? I really have to do monumental things as controller to get covered in the newspapers or on TV. So you can see where people don't hear this, the financial success, every single day. So they just assume things are terrible in the world. But it took me 6 years to get us there. Well, really 5 years, right, to get us there. And then all of a sudden we have all this news coverage about this massive influx of money coming into all states, not just Illinois. So you could see where constituents might be confused and think, well, of course, Illinois is doing better financially because they got all this money. But once I explain to you the facts that, look, we were already there a year ago, before a penny of that money came into the state of Illinois, at that point you should say, oh, okay, I wasn't aware of that. And now that you can prove to me that these bills had already been paid down before you got the money, I'm going to stop spreading misinformation, right? The facts of the matter are, they know this, they keep spreading misinformation. There's nothing I can do about that. I just hope that the voters trust that I've been more than transparent. I mean, really, I've ushered in historic transparency to this office. I want people to know what we're doing with their money.
So that's Susana Mendoza on the paying down the bill backlog. I also asked her about the rainy day fund, which got $1 billion earlier in the year in the state budget, and is getting another $800 million and change in the bill, the BIMP bill that was passed in the lame duck session. And I think we need to go back and realize that essentially since the Blagojevich administration, the state has had no rainy day fund. And that means through the housing market collapse, that means through the budget impasse, that means when we got into COVID, there was no cushion to fall on. So I asked her how important it was for her to have a rainy day fund that's being established.
I don't want to tell you I think it's everything, but it is such a big part of the equation, right? It is. I can't understate the importance of this. And I know that when the public hears you have over $1 billion, and everyone has an interest that they care about, right? They think, well, maybe that's too much money. $1 billion is a lot of money. I don't like paying taxes, so you should cut my taxes so that we don't need $1 billion. Give it to us in tax breaks or something. But the reality of it is that it's important for me to keep talking about this and educating the public, because $1 billion is not even a week's worth of reserves for the state of Illinois. If you care about your kids' education, if you care about having police and fire, if you care about roads and bridges, if you care about whatever you care about, healthcare, right? Those things cost money. That's why we pay taxes. And so if there were another devastating collapse of our economy through no fault of our own, and I'll give you two. One of them was 9/11. Right, when 9/11 happened, that wasn't Illinois' fault, but it certainly blew a massive hole in our budget, as it did in every other state in our nation. And we had to recover from that. Another one would be the economic collapse of 2008, right? That wasn't Mrs. Smith's fault over in Portage Park. It was something that happened across the country, and we had to brace for it. COVID is the third. That was no fault of our own, right? Now, the sad part of this story is that the one that came before COVID was 100% a man-made calamity, and that was the budget impasse. Totally unnecessary. During the best economy of our lifetimes, we inflicted the most damage in the state's history to our state, right? 8 consecutive credit downgrades in 2 years before I became controller under Governor Rauner. Over $1 billion, $1.104 billion in late payment interest penalties because we were deadbeats. And the average bill payment cycle was, on average, 210 business days. That's how long we would tell a vendor doing business with our state who had done their job that they had to wait to get paid, right? So many businesses went out of business. Justifiably so, right? Understandably so. And so you had those 8 credit downgrades that are so hard to recover from, because it's really hard to get an upgrade, but it's super easy to get a downgrade. But then you're going to spend the next 10 years trying to claw your way back up. And so that was a man-made disaster, and it ended up impacting our budgets worse than 9/11 did, worse than COVID, because at least COVID, the government was there to help us get through that, right? And worse than the economic collapse of 2008. That's what those 2 years of the best economy did for us.
So obviously, Mendoza's point is that we shouldn't have been in this situation, but obviously the budget impasse put the state behind the 8 ball, and as I think you can you can look at this objectively and say that whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you think that the Pritzker administration is spending too much money or not, or whether you think that the ARPA, the federal funds have helped with balancing the budget, which of course they have, higher than expected revenues because people got an influx of cash from the federal government. These things have all contributed, but it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing that we are seeing some improvement in state finances. But then you have incidents like in this same bill that the rainy day fund addition got passed, included these last second under the radar pay increases for every member of the legislature, for constitutional officers like Mendoza, and for a certain number of the governor's cabinet, basically. And it's one thing to put a pay increase in the budget and then to go face taxpayers about it. And actually, the legislature did do that. It did give itself a pay increase in the budget that passed in April. But then, 2 days before the governors knew, these constitutional officers' terms were to take effect, they slide in another pay increase. And that's not to say that you don't want these people to have competitive salaries, because you want to incentivize good people to do it, but it looks bad. So I wondered what Mendoza thought about the perception of the pay increase and how it looked as it came just under the radar, just under the wire before she took her oath for a second term.
To say that if people think that I don't deserve the raise, then they shouldn't vote for me, right? But I can assure you that I'm very thankful and appreciative and respectful of whatever my salary is that the taxpayers choose to give me, right, at the end of the day, and that I'm going to work very, very hard every day of my life to earn it and to far exceed the investment that they're making me. I want to be the best return on their investment ever. And legislators are going to have to, work hard to earn that, and if they don't, then they should be voted out, right? Any one of us. If we don't work hard to earn our keep, then we don't deserve to be there. So, but I will say this. I understand where taxpayers are coming from and that no one likes to see elected officials get pay raises. But I will say that I'm glad that if they were going to do it, they did it in an honest way where they had to vote for it. And it wasn't snuck in or through some court order that because they pretended to be honorable and then on the other side, stick it to the taxpayers. So at least now, look, voters don't like it. They can hold their legislator who voted that way accountable.
She's referring there to former state senators Mike Nolan and James Claiborne, who essentially sued the state for back pay even after they rejected cost of living adjustments while they served in the legislature. And that's a case that went all the way to the state Supreme Court last year. I think it was last year, sometime in 22, that it was essentially rejected by the Supreme Court that they don't get back pay, even though they were trying to get that. But that was those were Mendoza's comments on the pay raises for lawmakers. And I had I wondered her thoughts on the governor's inaugural address, where he laid out some potentially very expensive ideas, like free college tuition for, we don't know what threshold. He said working class, he said below poverty line before. We don't know exactly where he's going with that yet. But same with free childcare and free preschool. And as the state's slowly trying to build its financial footing back up, I asked Mendoza if she's concerned about potentially high-priced social programs coming through the legislature.
These are concepts that a lot of people can get behind, even members of both parties, frankly, right? But it's like they say, the devil's in the details, right? You're going to say, do people whose parents make a ton of money, or who are wealthy already, should they qualify? I think everyone would universally agree, no, right? But who is that universe of kids going to be? I'll give you an example, MAP grants, right? When MAP grants first passed, they covered pretty much the entire tuition, right? So most poor kids that qualified for MAP grant funding, this actually allowed them to go to college. And then every year it kind of tuition gets more expensive. The MAP grants don't get much bigger. If anything, they stay the same or get reduced, right? So you see that the MAP grants don't really cover tuition. So I don't know what the plan is yet for how they're going to decide who qualifies for these programs, but the price tag might not actually be as huge as you might envision it. It could be like a combination of, let's say, MAP grant, like whoever qualifies for MAP grants today would qualify for the free. When they're already getting subsidized a significant amount, so the additional is what you'd be looking at the cost, right? Now, if they open it up beyond that, if they say like anyone who qualifies for EITC, well, that's a lot of people, right? So it just kind of depends on the universe, what's your universe, and then you do the math. But I would say that investing in kids' education is a good investment with a good return on investment for our state. What we don't want to see is Illinois continue to hemorrhage our talented youth to other states, right, that offer better incentives. And so why do I think this is important? It's just from besides the moral component, which clearly is, right, we should be investing in our youth. We always talk about how the kids are the future, but then it's like, well, let's not help them out, right? What I would say is this. If you don't care about the moral component, think of the economics of it. We have, as a state, and every state is the same way, we have invested in these kids in the public education system from the minute they're eligible for it, which hopefully will become younger and younger, right? Because there's tons of evidence to suggest that investing in early childhood education has an incredible return on investment. But let's just say even at kindergarten, right? So kindergarten through high school, we've put billions of dollars into educating these kids, only then to lose them to other states once they're actually smart and go off to college, right? And so other schools will recruit them because they give them better scholarships or whatever. And then once those kids leave Illinois, they're inclined to probably not come back, right? A lot of kids set up roots in other states. If they end up getting married, having kids, who follows? Mom and dad a lot. You see this other migration that we never really talk about, right? And so how can we as a state, how do we think about this as a bigger picture and say, what can we do to keep this huge investment, this outlay of billions of dollars that we've done over the lifetime of this child, multiplied by X amount of kids, right? How do we keep that investment working for Illinois and paying off? Because right now we're making the investment. But if we lose those kids to other states, we get zero return on investment. We're actually a negative return on that investment because those kids aren't going to be contributing taxes in our state. They're going to be contributing elsewhere.
So that's an argument for, the idea of more investment in things like childcare and preschool and obviously trying to get kids under the poverty line potentially to go to college in Illinois. And just final note for final touch on Mendoza was just kind of with the weird economy that we're living through right now, where inflation was really high in the first half of last year. It's still high, but it's not as bad as it was. The Fed has continued raising interest rates, basically daring the economy to go into a recession. But unemployment is low, and the price of goods is high, and it's this weird economic situation, and it almost feels sometimes like. And again, I'm not an economist for many reasons. One being I'm not that smart, but two, but does it? But I wondered from her perspective as she's planning and trying to figure out how to pay the state's bills, how she looks at a weird economic outlook like we're in right now and plans for it.
Say that short of another horrific, crisis that's no fault of our own, I only look at that as a positive thing because, again, remember, I've only managed us through crisis, right? And we still have come out on top. So I really much look forward to better days where it's not like the house is burning today, right? And so I feel if we can be in this position right now, like a little blip in the economy or a little recession, it's not something that scares me, put it that way. And I always think very conservatively. So when you think little recession, I'm thinking catastrophic recession, right? Like that's how we prepare. We're not preparing for the best case scenario. We're preparing for the worst case scenario, but hopeful for better things. So when I hear even amidst high inflation, even with talk of potential recessions, there are things that give me positivity, like the fact that it's different than our past recession where nobody had jobs, right? This is a recession potentially, if it happens, where it's hard to find an employee, right? Like, go ask Jimmy who owns this place, and
There's
he'll
a
tell
sign
you,
on the door.
yeah, he's paying $30 an hour for dishwashers or cooks, and he still can't attract them, right? I mean, who would have thought that 3-4 years ago? So the issue isn't that people can't find a job, it's people are being very picky as to where they want to work because it's really a worker's market right now. That's different than in a normal recession, right? It's not that people don't want to buy a car because they don't have the money. They can't get the car because of the supply chain, right? So there's other things that have driven the inflation going up. So there are other positive markers in the economy that I think bode well long term and even short term that make me less nervous than if people were losing their jobs, didn't have income coming in, if we saw that reflected in our state revenues, and on top of that we heard of like a recession around the corner, right?
So that's State Comptroller Susana Mendoza, who is obviously, the numbers showed that she did quite well in November, and is, I think it's safe to say, popular politician in the state. So the question is, what's next for her? You don't find a lot of people that aspire to be state comptroller. Both the two before her, Dan Hines and Judy Bartopinka, both ran for governor. So essentially, what does Mendoza want to do? She ran for mayor of Chicago 4 years ago. Of course, did not make it past kind of the knockout stage. But I think you're going to hear her name come up a lot. Whether, depending on what J.B. Pritzker does in 4 years, if he runs for president, if he waits until 2028 and thinks about running for president, then depending on what Dick Durbin does, if he doesn't seek another term in the U.S. Senate. So there's a lot of reasons to keep Susana Mendoza on your mind as you think about politics in the state over the next 5 or 10 years. Speaking of D.C., since we mentioned Durbin, I sat down with my former boss, Congressman Rodney Davis, earlier this week. I worked his campaign in 2012, and he lost a primary in June to in a new gerrymandered district, but he's very close to Kevin McCarthy, the new Speaker of the House. So I wanted to talk to him about kind of what that looked like, and then some perspective from him on how Republicans can kind of right their ship from not only mediocrity, but chaos that we've seen so far in the state for Republicans politically. So here's our conversation with Davis. We're pleased now to be joined by former Congressman Rodney Davis, now former Congressman Rodney Davis, who just recently gave up his seat in the old 13th district after losing a primary, in the new 15th district after being gerrymandered out of his district, and some career news for Rodney as well, which we'll get to. Congressman, obviously folks know that I worked on your first campaign in 2012, so if there's any bias, they know that up front. But it's good to talk to you. How do you feel post-Congress now? I hear there are some people who when they leave, they long to be back, and there are those that are just like, hey, whatever, it's what the voters want.
Look, I haven't looked back. When I lost the primary unexpectedly, none of us thought that it would happen. I had it, and the polling showed that we would win until we didn't. I did what everybody who loses this election should do. I picked up the phone, called my opponent, conceded. Then I walked outside and talked to my friends and family who were there and said, what's next? And I really haven't looked back. I enjoyed my 10 years in Congress. I really enjoyed being a legislator. And as a matter of fact, I think we got a lot of things done. You were around when I made my promises of what I would do if elected to Congress. And I fulfilled many of those promises, Patrick. And I'm excited to be able to look back on my career and look at those successes. But at the same time, I'm excited to start a new career as I move into my 53rd year on Earth.
So obviously you're a guy who has been close to Kevin McCarthy and Steve Scalise and kind of the current House leadership now. What was your reaction as you watched the speaker vote go on and on and on and on for days last week?
Oh, it was absolute embarrassment for my friends who were voting for Kevin McCarthy every single ballot, and that was over 200 of them. It was embarrassing to be held hostage by a small group of people who were asking for demands that many of those demands were already in the rules package. Many of those demands were just seemingly moving every day and multiple times a day. You know, I was doing TV coverage on CNN while it was happening, so I was texting a lot of my friends that were on the floor, and then I was in DC, so I would end up back at the Capitol talking to many of my colleagues. And there's one thing that I witnessed that was actually, you know, I don't think the folks who were on the panel with me believed me when I said what this is doing is it's empowering the 200 plus Republicans in Congress to stand up to those who just didn't want to vote for Kevin, regardless of why they said they didn't want to vote for Kevin. It was all personal. And those 200 are now stronger, which in the end, Kevin McCarthy would not have put himself through 15 rounds if he didn't have the overwhelming support of the people who were in that Republican conference. They are now stronger. And Kevin McCarthy, I would argue, is a stronger speaker for having gone through what he did.
You know, I've had my criticisms of Kevin McCarthy over the years, especially the going and hugging Trump after January 6th. But there are some criticisms, obviously, of you know, whether he's quote unquote spineless or waves in the wind. Do you have faith that he can be a decent speaker?
I think Kevin McCarthy is going to be a great speaker. I'm very close to Kevin. He's one of my closest friends in Congress. He believed in me to run a committee that is a leadership appointed committee, the Committee on House Administration. I worked hand in hand with him and his team over my time in Congress. So I think Kevin McCarthy is going to be a great speaker. You know, there's a lot of people that are in Congress, and a lot of those 200 that voted for Kevin feel the same way I do. You know, they're in districts like the one I ran in. They're solid Republican districts where former President Trump can play a role in the primary process. Look, I don't have a lot of love lost for the guy, but in the end, Donald Trump was actually made stronger because it was him who finally got angry enough with those 5 who were just doing what they could to stop Congress from being organized, to stop Kevin McCarthy from doing what most Republicans in Congress and in our country wanted to happen, to have him as speaker. And ironically, Donald Trump is stronger because of his involvement in the speaker's race last week.
Why does he have what Donald Trump, meaning why does he continue to have such a hold on the Republican Party?
Well, I don't see that he's got a hold on the Republican Party. It's just that he can play a role. I mean, a lot of my colleagues are going to look at my loss and say, wow, man, if Trump's against me, then they can beat Davis in a district that if they don't know the lines of a new district, then they're going to take a step back and say, what can I do to make sure that doesn't happen electorally? But in the end, I mean, you saw footage of Marjorie Taylor Greene on the phone with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump talking to these individuals and getting them to vote president. Donald Trump, if, you know, coming out of that speaker's race, has more ability to, in my opinion, get back into some good graces with many who were frustrated by him, because he ended the embarrassment. He ended the madness. And it took him getting angry enough at those 5 to get them to finally acquiesce to do the right thing. And, you know, we'll see what the long-term consequences are. If President Trump feels like, hey, you know, I got them to do what I wanted them to do, and I'm still angry they put me into that position, or if he's going to go back and somewhat, you know, just play Svengali and play both sides of the party and put himself into irrelevance.
You know, it wasn't that long ago, though. I mean, you know, when I worked with you, it was 2012. 2020 was the last race I worked with when we ran against Mary Miller in a primary, and the entire electorate, the entire Republican electorate seemingly changed in those 8 years. That it was in 2012, your Republican voters wanted someone who was good on guns and abortion and taxes and those sort of things. And by 2020, it was all we want is fealty to Trump. And it just seems like the party has lost its way. In the sense that it's all about a person instead of a set of ideals that it used to be. Do you disagree with that?
Well, there are some that consider themselves Republicans that became Republicans because of Donald Trump. You were with me in 2012, and you heard UMW folks tell me that, hey, they could never vote for me because I was a Republican. Over the course of a decade, many of those same individuals would then chastise me when they thought I wasn't Republican enough. So the blue collar Republican revolution has solidified over those 10 years. And Donald J. Trump as the presidential candidate in 2016 nuclearized that process. So he spoke to them. They felt the Democrat Party at the national level had left them, even though many of their same labor unions were still pushing that narrative that the Democrats in Washington cared about them. Well, they left the Democratic Party. They're not going back. So the Republican Party, as we know it, is a much different makeup. And at the same time that Donald Trump was bringing in those blue-collar workers, he was pushing away the suburban Republican support that had been Republican for decades. And there's no better place to show that movement than DuPage County.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, where you go from a place that Bruce Rauner won by 10% in 2014 to Darren Bailey losing it by 52,000 votes in 2020. I mean, it's very clear that Trumpism is hurting Republicans in the suburbs. So as someone who's run campaigns, who's run the state party, who's been in Congress, who's been up front at this, how do Republicans in Illinois get it back on track?
Well, it's going to take a lot of work. Number one, we got to elect candidates in the primary that can win. Darren Bailey was a terrible candidate for governor. And if voters don't think that has an impact on the rest of the ticket, then they're not living in reality. At some point, you have to have candidates that can win races, and Republicans can still win in the suburban Chicago areas with the right candidates. We've seen that time and time again. But what has to happen is we have to realize downstate is going to vote for any Republican candidate. Downstate has changed dramatically. The rural parts of my old district that continued to put me in Congress, even though that district was drawn to elect a Democrat with all of the public universities in the urban areas that were included. Downstate Illinois will support a Republican, but we as Republicans have to identify candidates that can get the support in areas where most of our population is, and that's in the northeast corner of our state. And it's doable. You look at a race like the Caston-Pecaw race. I was watching the numbers doing election night coverage in St. Louis at KMOV, and I saw Keith Peacock. He came out of the Cook County portion of that district basically tied. Mm-hmm. All he had left was DuPage. And I thought, wow, this is going to be a win. He lost DuPage by 20,000 votes. That's a problem when you have the top of the ticket that takes down a good candidate like Peacock that went and won the areas that he wasn't supposed to win in those blue-collar areas, but lost what used to be the most Republican county in the nation.
And I was on WGN that night when I saw Peacaw's numbers in the city. I leaned over to the anchor and said, "Peacaw's going to win that race," and it was clear that DuPage was just the undoing. Much of your district is now represented by your old district is now represented by a Democrat, Nikki Budzinski, who ran a very smart, very safe race in her campaign. She's trying to make herself appear as a moderate as she's taken her early votes here. What's your advice to her as and I know you guys talked at one point, but what's your advice to her moving forward in trying to govern this difficult time politically and in a really 50-50 district?
Well, as Nikki knows, and as everybody that listens to your podcast knows, that I endorsed and supported Regan Deering for that seat. Thought Regan would do a phenomenal job. Nikki won, and that's a district that is very, very liberal district. The way that it snakes through the Champaign-Urbana area and into areas of Decatur and Springfield, and then down into some very liberal areas in the Metro East. Very Metro East district. Nikki, who I've gotten to know through the orientation process, remember, my job as the lead Republican on House Administration is to actually run orientation. So I talked to Nikki a lot. I sat by her on the floor when Speaker Pelosi announced that she wasn't going to stand for Speaker again. I've given Nikki advice that I would give anyone, and frankly, I've been impressed that she's asking for a lot of advice. Nikki is going to try and figure out how to cast those votes between the moderates in Macoupin County and also areas of Macon County versus the far left in Champaign-Urbana and the Metro East. And those are going to be the difficulties she's going to have. Same difficulties I had. I would vote I would vote my district to be able to fulfill the promises I made as a candidate. And sometimes that didn't appease the far right. And that got me primary challenges when I ran for re-election in 2014 and 2016. And then when we were in the minority, I was conservative enough for those same individuals in 2018 and 2020. Nikki's going to have that same problem. But I would argue, looking at the first few votes that have gone through Congress and determining whether or not those are moderate versus liberal votes, almost every Democrat voted for those, voted to create the Select Committee on China, and voted to make sure we didn't sell Strategic Petroleum Reserve oil to China. Those are easy votes. So Nikki's going to face some tough ones, and I'm sure that I'll be talking to her before that, and she knows she can pick up the phone and give me a call if she wants unadulterated, unfiltered advice.
Before we let you go, Congressman, you have a new job with Cozen O'Connor, a lobbying firm in D.C. You can't be a lobbyist, of course, with the federal cooling off period. But do you think that it gives a bad tone, a bad view for people who see politicians leave office and then immediately go to a lobbying firm? I mean, obviously you've got a cooling off period. Our friend Tim Butler, who left the state house, obviously state rules are a little bit different. He didn't have to have a cooling off period, so he's able to register right away. Is there a perception problem? I mean, about how and why politicians move into these lobbying gigs so quickly?
Well, I will tell you, as somebody who had a pretty long off ramp, I looked at all opportunities, and I had a lot of opportunities. In the end, if you're somebody who's active in public policy, and remember, Patrick, I was a congressional staffer for 16 years before I ran for office. So for the past 26 years, I've worked in the House and around the House, and I enjoy public policy. So I found out my interest as someone being able to build a second career is in advocating on behalf of public policy and advocating on behalf of issues. So I was excited to move into this next career. I've also found many of my colleagues who are in the same boat as me who left Congress haven't had the opportunity. So the so-called revolving door is based upon companies or firms, et cetera, recognizing that a former member can provide some value. Tim Butler, with his experience working on infrastructure and transportation issues as a staffer for Ray LaHood, as a staffer for me, and then also working those issues when he was in the State House, is somebody that is going to be able to excel at his job. So should somebody who has served the public be hamstrung more than they already are? Like, I can't officially lobby my colleagues in the House and the Senate for a year. So am I going to be a less effective public policy advocate because of that? Who knows? But in the end, there are safeguards. There are transparency issues. There are ethics rules at the federal level that I had to follow and make sure that I didn't go beyond. And those are things that are already in place that I don't think the public knows about, that ensures that there's not this pay-to-play type of attitude that exists in certain areas within politics in Illinois.
Congressman Rodney Davis, appreciate your time, your input. Hopefully we can have you back here and there as somebody that can weigh in on issues and what's going on and what they actually mean as we go on here.
Well, happy to see you, Patrick. Enjoy the new year, the little one, and I'm excited for you. If there's any way you want to put me back on so I can trash you and trash your show, I'm happy to do that, my friend.
Do it anytime, my man, anytime. Thanks, Congressman.
See you, buddy.
All right, that's Congressman Rodney Davis. Appreciate his time. Former Congressman Rodney Davis, of course, who left Congress a couple of weeks ago after the previous Congress expired. So little bit on the longer side today, but I hope you found the information and the conversations valuable, and that's what we're trying to do. You know, obviously Susana Mendoza, a Democrat, Rodney Davis, a Republican. We're trying to give you interesting perspectives from interesting people on all sides, and I'm trying to be fair to everybody because that's the only way we improve our system, because everyone's so dug in. And, you know, it's going to take all of us being able to have conversations with those that disagree with us to help improve this jacked up political system here in the state and around the country, if anytime soon. So thanks so much for taking the time, for those of you watching live here on YouTube or Facebook or on Twitter, or those of you who download the podcast after. We really do appreciate you and your support. If you don't get the newsletter, go to theillinoize.com, ILLINOIZE, and sign up in the top right corner. Get the free stuff. You can get the free stuff every day if you'd like. So we appreciate your signing up and getting our newsletter and enjoying our content as we continue to travel on the busy, crazy, on fire roads of Illinois politics, but we'll keep it up and do our best as we go on. So thanks, everyone. Have a great day.